Yes, yes. Ladies and gentle people, welcome. Welcome to the stream. We are live and direct from good old Mama Africa. Beaming to you from South Africa, as it were, to be more specific. And this is StoryTime. Welcome. You might not be accustomed to StoryTime on what's it today? Tuesday. My apologies if you were expecting one on Sunday. Unfortunately, in Africa, things don't always run according to the schedules that you sometimes plan. So my apologies for that. But we wouldn't let the opportunity for a story time miss us. And we're at episode 21, and so much has happened since the last one. I don't even know where to begin. You're new here, thank you so much for joining us. It is really a pleasure to communicate a little bit of mysterious kind of dot linking. I guess that's what we do. We link some dots here on this channel, on this here podcast, and we try have a little bit of fun as we go about it. Sometimes I get a little bit deep in the weeds, as it were, looking at policy documents and freedom of request, this and that. But basically, I'm your friendly Euphoria, bringing you just a couple of fascinating stories. Just a bunch of things that you make up your own mind. I'm not here to convince you of anything. This is a two-way discussion, so I'm here to learn. I'm here to tell you what I know and the way I know it, and I'm open-minded to always being rectified if, because I misspeak all the time. I'll call a major a general, I'll, mix up my acronyms and all of those things, but I try. One thing that you will definitely get on this channel is a bunch of really interesting rabbit holes, and we try not label ourselves as this or that. We are neither conspiracy theorists, nor UFO experts, nor parapsychological, I guess, appreciators. It all kind of fits together. My personal background is philosophy and politics, geopolitics, as it were, international relations. But if you look at our history, there are many things that we struggle to explain, and the deeper you dive into them, all that comes out is more questions. And so it's not always apparent to us. We're often running around doing what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis as normal human beings, and we're not always able to keep this big picture in focus. And that's where I come in, trying to summarize a few interesting points and to bring to you some of the knowledge that in some way or another, although it's a story and although it's fun and games, there is always a grain of truth to it. And that's what I hope to bring you in story time. Now, goodness gracious, in our episode 21, we are looking at ET technology and basically the deep state intertwined in fighting schisms. Now, if you don't know what we're talking about there, that's good. This is what this whole stream is about. We'll be going for about 2 hours here. We've got a hard cut at 10 again. This is how South Africa is currently operating. But I think we'll be able to squeeze everything in. And what we really hope to dive into when we talk about ET technology and deep state schisms is that recently we've had quite a big hustle and bustle, especially from the United States, especially from their congressional hearings, and especially from a lot of their laws and witness testimonies and some evidence and whatever that's come forward. Not all of it is public, but at least it is in the hands of publicly elected officials. So that's interesting. People have testified before Congress, which itself comes with the weight of the law. You're not allowed to lie to Congress and easily get away with it. It is a federal crime. And so as we watch this chaos unfold in the United States, and when I say chaos, I mean this UAP disclosure where David Grusch comes out and Fitzpatrick contradicts him and the Pentagon contradicts him, but then more witnesses come out. And, prior to that, Stephen Greer also had a panel of extremely, I guess, well-versed and well-accredited whistleblowers. They had a very different feel to them compared to Grusch and his band of merry men. But it is nonetheless interesting, whether you think that this is official disclosure, whether you are still on the fence about whether aliens exist or not, and this is a psyop. Well, I'm here to unpack all of that for you. And if you followed the previous story times that we've had, you'll know that indeed much of the information that we are being presented to us is complete theater, smoke and mirrors, a psyop, a lot of it. But there is a grain of truth, and they can't seem to control that truth. And this is the underpinning point of this whole episode. The truth, when you hide it, requires some deep digging of lies and counter lies and spun narratives and things like that. And so as you try and cover up a truth with lies, you need additional layers of lies on top of it. And eventually you can't keep the story straight. It all just kind of spins out of control, and all you can do is just confuse the situation. And now I'm talking from the perspective of the military-industrial complex, the Hydra, as it were. This entity has, in many cases, even if you're not thinking about alien technology, and I don't mean to only point at the American military, but militaries and governments all over the world are pretty much of the same ilk. But tonight we're going to be focusing a little bit on the US, because that's where all the things are happening there. So what I wanted to just say was that when we're talking about the military-industrial complex that comes from a powerful nation like the United States, whether you're considering the alien technology or not, or the special technology, or the beyond next generation technology, as they call it in their documents, whether you're thinking that this is ET or not, there is definitely a level of secrecy that goes in these black projects and these unacknowledged special access projects that they've got. And the big thing here, is that these technologies, whether it's a missile or a sensor or a propulsion system, it is in control of people that are not always trustworthy. I'm not talking about the whole American military here. I'm sure there are, in fact, most are really good people trying to serve their country in a deep and meaningful way. But as these projects are so compartmentalized, 99.9% of them have no idea that some of these things are going on. And because there's now also a blur between the special projects moving between different parts of the military and in collaboration with private contractors, the deep state becomes this cloud. It's not clear where the boundary is, and who is in the know and who isn't, and what offshoot is aware of what other offshoot. It's all a big mess. It's what happens when you bloat your military and it runs away from you and it begins to do unconstitutional things. And if you think that that's not a possibility, I mean, just look at the CIA. We'll bump into them time and time again in our story time telling. Mostly because the extent of their illegal activities is just mind-bending. very evil, as it were, in some cases, very unconstitutional, as it would go down, but also at least there is a lot of transparency that has come through things like the church committee and other hearings which have slowly brought up the dredge from below the deep waters. Now, the problem we're facing here, let me try square it for you all. The problem we're facing here is that when you've got sections of your government and military and private industry, it sometimes is also transnational, so there's another layer of complexity. But when you've got this group and they are able to hide themselves from the purview of law and from the oversight of elected officials and, the actual system of justice, what you end up with are people with extremely unlimited resources in a certain sense, able to do whatever they want. And the technology is so advanced in certain cases that they could either let's just say, in the case of nuclear weapons or beyond nuclear weapons, could destroy us all, the whole planet, everything. It's not a pleasant thought to keep in mind that our fate is held in the hands of people that, in my opinion, are pretty much sociopaths, because if you're not going to deal within the laws of your countrymen and be a citizen like everybody else, and instead you're going to take this information, make your technology, and run illegal programs, then I think you're not really with the rest of the human purpose. There is a lot to be answered for and accounted for, and that's what's interesting about this whole thing. Even if this whole UAP hearing, alien, whatever, even if 1% turns out to be true and 99% is just hocus pocus, well, even if just 1% of what we're talking about here is even remotely true, just asking questions will begin to spin the lies out of control. And whatever's the outcome, it's going to be amazing either way. Whether the outcome is that the government's just crazy and doing weird things and, they just have no sense, or whether, on the other hand, they're completely aware of what they're doing and deliberately causing strife for the average person as they play their secret war games. Whatever side of the spectrum you seem to fall on, either way, it's going to be an amazing ride. There's much to be discovered here. And so tonight, we're going to try and bring three things together. It's kind of like a triangle, let's call it. At the top, we've got the alien phenomena. Now, some might say it's not alien, some might say it's just phenomena, whatever you want to call it. Now, on the left and right of that, you've got technologies, and on the other hand, you've got who's running that relationship. Now, when I say who's running that relationship, this is the second part of StoryTime we'll look at, which is the deep state schism. There seems to be, in my opinion, some kind of a tug of war happening. And this tug of war, we've actually spoken about it before in previous story times, and it kind of relates to those that hide the secrets from those that actually, within the system of power that we've designed, should have some kind of knowledge and oversight. So we've seen in the past where even presidents and generals and heads of CIA get briefed on these matters, and they say, how is it possible that we don't have control of this? Now, recently, with the disclosure disclosure coming forward from people like David Grusch and Greaves and Commander Freya and a bunch of these others, they've gotten to the level of a congressional hearing that's been widely mediatized, and in a certain sense, it seems to have taken root. It's come off the back of previous disclosures, that of Stephen Greer and Grusch previously going to News Nation and giving that exclusive because the Washington Post and New York Times didn't want to run with it. They had to run with that story quickly, they said. And the two big media companies were just interested but couldn't pull the trigger on it. And so Grusch went to News Nation, which, if you look in the background of who owns and runs that, it's rather interesting. But let me not digress. So, this whole thing of disclosure coming up recently has seemed to be a bit more effective. And this time around, it's actually resulted in some laws. And in this big maneuver, some things are not as straight as they seem. And this is where the schism comes in. I'll give you an example. We mentioned earlier that, for example, Grusch comes out and says we have got reverse engineering programs of this alien tech, and we're reproducing them ourselves. RO comes out, Fitzpatrick, that's head, and says, I have no knowledge of this. Whatever evidence you've brought forward, it's supposed to come through my channels, and I flatly just say that you have no idea what you're talking about, and, why are you not informing me? And, it's not clear why there's this impasse between the two. Now, not only that, there's other schisms all over the place. For example, on a political level, if you look at bigwigs like Robert Bigelow putting in all his money and efforts into Ron DeSantis to try get him forward. And Bigelow, remember, he's the one that came out recently with these UAP hearings to have won the contract with these incredible technologies. Let me see if I can actually pull that up very quickly for you. Now, on the one hand, you've got Robert Bigelow, who's completely all in with one politician trying to, in some way get him ahead, and we know that he has deep ties to the whole UAP phenomena. Let me just see if I can pull up that Freedom of Information request that fingers Bigelow. That didn't come out right. Well, just basically points to the fact that the contract had been won by Bigelow Aerospace. And is this the one? Unfortunately, I've got two versions. One is quite redacted, and so it doesn't show all the things that I want. Whilst the other, on the other hand, does have a few more bits and pieces that I can have a look at. So here we go, contracts. And here's one of them. Let me bring it up on screen for you. And the reason that I'm bringing this up on screen, just to remind you, is just, again, that when you have people that have aerospace, very deep aerospace ties to advanced technology, and through freedom of information, we get things like this. This is one of the contracts, and you can see there, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, and what they are, you see, this is the one that was redacted, but at least I could spot the name. What they're looking for here are things like performance by Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies has been excellent, and they are in full compliance with the aerospace contract. Extensive monthly status reports, all of this, and recommends that the Defense Intelligence Agency should go forward with option of 1 year with Bigelow Aerospace, subject to available funding. Now, these contracts, I'm going to try to zoom this in for you so you can have a good look at what they are contracted to do. And I'll have to try hunt down where the authors are so you can deep dive. In fact, you'll have to check a previous StoryTime, and if not, I'll try and put them up for you. But there we go, check out this. It's matter antimatter energy source for space flight, vacuum energy applications, improved statistical approach to the Drake equation. And the Drake equation is how many civilizations might exist in our perceived universe, I think is the way they get that. Quantum entanglement communication, laser weapons, programmable matter, brain-machine interfaces, warp drives. This is who has decided to go all in on someone like Ron DeSantis. But, he is one, and then on the other hand, you've got others that are also deeply involved in the aerospace technology field, like Senator Mark Rubio and all these others. And in fact, Rubio made a very interesting comment about how there are many people that are read into this program that might not even be government, might not even be, they might just, what did he call them? Public figures. Now, in my interpretation, when he said that, I think he meant public figures as in a sense of someone of great either political or scientific esteem, is my interpretation. And let me see if I can pull that up, and then we'll have a listen to that. Because it was interesting. It was an interesting comment, and it ties into this concept of the disclosure. Now, again, as I said, all of this disclosure is twisted in counterintelligence and psyops and stuff. But we have to pick the little seeds of truth here to try and get to the bottom of what's going on, and to try and also see where this friction is coming from, where Grusch is saying one thing and, political... Grusch is saying one thing and Dr. Fitzpatrick is saying another, and you see some people sponsoring certain aerospace-related political people. On the other hand, you got like Chris Mellon. He's also of the Mellon family, big banking and all other kinds of big industry, and they're also involved in the whole thing. And everyone's trying to vie in. And we also know that the Trump family and the Kennedy family are deeply involved in the whole advanced technology UFO file. You think that, sharing some of this information with the Russians is what got him into trouble. That is JFK when he was assassinated. Now, that's conjecture. Please go see our previous story times. There's some interesting links there. But let's just have a look here at Mark Rubio making those claims. Let me just make sure I don't blast your ears. And see if I can put that up on screen for you. Okay.
I actually had the people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Well, I think more importantly, the Inspector General has referred it to Congress. We have a law for whistleblowers. So they go to the Inspector General of the intelligence community, and then they have an obligation. If they find it to be an urgent concern, credible and urgent concern, their job is to refer it to Congress, and they have done so. There are one or two things here are true. Either what he is saying is partially true or entirely true, or we have some really smart, educated people with high clearances and very important positions in our government who are crazy and are leading us on a goose chase.
We have a process where you can talk to Congress or you can talk to Arrow and say, hey, I saw this, I saw that, I was part of this program.
So this is Congressman Mike Gallagher. And he was on a radio show, a podcast, and they really went at him because, again, they say that whistleblowers have a process, but Grusch came forward saying, I'm coming forward as a whistleblower, not so much because of the alien tech, but because I suffered retribution for trying to bring this information forward to my superiors, which is an interesting take on the whole matter.
And so that was a monumental piece of legislation. And what's happened since we passed that is all sorts of
How many
are coming out of the woodwork.
people who we entrusted to do some really important things for our country are saying some pretty incredible things that I think we have an obligation to take seriously and listen.
So he's absolutely correct. So this is Senator Marco Rubio you're seeing on the left there, just giving an interview. And he's one of the politicians coming forward, along with Gillibrand and Burkett, Luna. You can see that there's a lot of political vying, and not everybody has a square story. Let's have another example of that friction we looked at last week, where Luna and Burkett wanted to bring forward the whole hearing with Grusch, and they got the whole runaround. It was eventually told to them that they didn't quite understand how the hearings should go forward, and they were embarrassed a little bit because they didn't get to engage in it as they should have. They got to ask questions and such, but they came forward on Twitter saying, "Is this thing even still happening?" Just before it was a bit of a question mark for a moment or two. And let's listen a little bit closer to Senator Rubio, because he's making a very strong point here. Like, he's saying that either the government is crazy, or these people with high clearances are coming forward with whatever means and ways necessary to bring to light this activity that is wholly unconstitutional. And Stephen Greer made such an amazing point about how many crimes can be involved in just this a priori unconstitutional, therefore illegal activity that these people are involved in. Let's listen a little bit further.
Listen to.
It is through the whistleblower process that people are contacting Congress and going through a debrief process where they're saying they've been part of this or that program. And we can't reveal the precise nature of what's been said, but we've had a variety of pretty intense conversations.
How do you guys lay that? Sorry, people who
Intense conversations. Yes, I'm sure, because there's also people all over the world now beginning to ask questions of American politicians and statesmen and representatives to say, what are you doing? What is this? Does our government now know something and now forcing them to put forward official statements? And we know that they all have study programs, the French, the Australians, the South Americans, many countries there. But it's forcing the hand of something that doesn't want to move. And so here, as I said, friction.
who have had firsthand knowledge, who claim to have firsthand knowledge of seeing this type of thing?
That's or have firsthand knowledge or firsthand claims of certain things. Some are public figures. I will say I find most of these people at some point, or maybe even currently, have held very high clearances and high positions within our government. So you do ask yourself, like, what incentive would so many people with that kind of qualification, these are serious people, have to come forward and make something up? We've heard from people that are both in the service of our government and some who used to serve in the past, and some of whom are publicly out there saying these things, sort of saying to us what you've seen out there in the public record, whether it's about legacy programs or about current events and things that are going on at this moment. And there's still a lot of people that I think are starting to edge towards coming forward, and we hear maybe coming forward, but are still trying to see how it plays out for the people that came forward first.
Now, what I want to point out there is he mentioned about the legacy programs. We've taken, I wouldn't say a very deep dive, but at least we've scratched a little bit further than the surface in our previous story times to show that the legacy program is what seems to be referred to as the knowledge of the UFO phenomena and its technologies, and how that should be brought to light to the people in the military and in places of political power, and then to the public, some kind of like slow disclosure. But instead what we got was very little, and in fact many people suffered incredible damages. If we think of, like, for example, Benevitz and others, they were drove into near insanity, and some other people just completely thrown out of windows, or their cars blew up, or they found strange poisonous gels on their doors on their way to work. You know, it's they can't just say that that there isn't anything subverting and then at some points very actively diverting and then very actively completely just destroying some people that got too close to these very classified truths. Now, this UAP phenomena that's hit the media, that's hit the congressional hearings, has seemed to light a fire. You know, there's like a UFO Twitter and everyone's talking about it around the dinner table. It seems to have taken roots in the psyche of people. Now, I say this because in the past, they have tried to do disclosure before, and in ways that were very similar to what we see here. And, you know, we've taken great pains in StoryTime to point out previous hearings, previous congressional witnesses and testimonies. You know, Greer, as I said, came out in 2001 with very good, credible witnesses that were willing to go under oath, and you know, then we kind of got blinded by 9/11, which happened a month or two later. So it goes further back, and much, much further back than we seem to understand. The whole reason I'm bringing this up now is because whether you believe Grusch or Coroso or none of the government or none of the military, the fact is I don't think that they would be willing to deal with such scrutiny, public and political, if there wasn't something that was underneath all of this. I mean, some of it, obviously, we've looked at before, is a complete opportunity for psychological operations, both foreign and domestic. So where you can control a narrative, the intelligence agencies definitely will. But in this case, not everything seems to be in their control because of these interlocking people trying to vie for the truth and disclosure, and you know, who's been read in and what channels were or not followed. And one big point that I would like to make here, and I've made this before and I'll make it again, there are big implications for all of this, and whether this whole story is true or false, I still think as human beings it's important for us to consider the real possibility that we're not the biggest fish in the pond. Whether AI might be evolving to a point where it'll surpass us in ways that we never thought imaginable, or whether we meet another alien race off or in this planet, who knows? The possibility is there. It's becoming more real by the day. And we need to really wrap our heads around what it means to be human in that cosmic sense. There's really where we'll find the right balance about how we should treat each other, and about what kind of image we want to put forward to the rest of the cosmos. Now, the problem there is that we don't have free reign to really make that a thing. For thousands of years, people with power have subverted populations into crazy ideas, whether it's a crusade or a war or just all kinds of events that shape and change our history at the whims of just mere mortal humans that don't seem to have a good grasp for how precious life and collaboration of the human species is. Now, these big questions about are we alone in the universe and are there bigger things comes front and square when we have this UAP story buzzing about, whether it's now or whether it's in the early 2000s or in the 70s or the 60s or the 50s. It just goes back and back and back. We are now getting, with more information, a greater acceleration of quote-unquote truth. And we have to discern what truth is really truth and which is the psyop. And the point here is that there is something natural in its phenomena happening that the government seems to be aware of, and now seems to be sort of waking up again and being like, oh, what are these lights in the sky? They forgot about the Foo Fighters and the Phoenix Lights and the Arizona Lights and things going back to the Vimanas of the ancient Hindus. It's just mind-boggling that now they're like, oh, okay, we need to figure this out. Anyways, the whole point though is that there is something going on, and we need to have a good look at it, and we need to look at it from the right perspective of not just being a superior apex predator with nothing above our knowledge, above our experience, above our being in this world. We have to open our minds up, and we have to listen to at least some of these people that have come forward under great threat in certain senses to give us more information that at least allows us to dig deeper. Whether their stories are real or not, the credible ones aren't always perfect, but they give us information that rolls out more information, and the story begins to unfold. And we appreciate those people for all that they're worth. You know, some are money-making snake oil salesmen. Like, you know, Dodi's been involved in some really deep counterintelligence. You know, he was part of that group that, I almost swore there, he was part of that group that applied psychological operations on Benevitz that drove him off the edge, in a sense. You know, but now he's coming out with this and that, and still involved, and you know, now he's going to tell us the truth, and you know, we got to be careful. Got to be careful of these people. But again, the big thing here, and the point that I wanted to make, is that there's something going on here, and there is this phenomena that we don't understand, and this phenomena that we don't understand is deeply connected to some kind of physics, some kind of, as I said, it's a phenomena we don't understand. There is some gap in our knowledge to be able to explain the things we're picking up on radar and through other pieces of evidence and testimony and whatever. And so at the heart of it is information and technology. We don't have the information and technology really to get to grips with this whole thing. Now, the government maybe does, the military maybe does, they might be aware of it, maybe they might really now be disclosing it to us, but the whole point of the matter is that this isn't the first or the second time we've had these big hearings. And, you know, we need to maybe just, in light of this disclosure business, maybe look again at how they were trying to push this information to us, because the big thing there is the technology is what they're after. That was my big point right from the get-go. They don't care if this is real or not real, or a natural phenomena or whatever. They just want to be able to understand, what can we take from this that we can militarize? And from there come classified secrets. They don't care if it's this alien or that alien, or if it changes religious or social structures forever. They can wangle that. They just want to be able to control the technology for military purposes. And so some people have tried to bring forward this technology and this information because they're like, wow, it's mind-bending the kind of things we're able to do. We don't have to live like insects under a log, just scuttling for survival. We have technologies that are clean and powerful and are able to uplift mankind in a way that we don't have to degenerate our planet. And imagine, because of its military application, they hide that from us, and we just have countless lives lost through wars for oil. What's the point? So, when we talk about the technology, and the UFO thing and the cover-up, it's all related. It's all related. If we look recently, one of the big stories that has come out in these last few days and weeks has been the whole concept of L99. Now, apparently, L99 is this material that is basically a room temperature and atmospheric temperature superconductor. In other words, it's a superconductor that will just be a superconductor without any application. You put it on the table, it's a superconductor. You don't have to reduce its, like we do now, you don't have to reduce its temperature to many, many, many degrees below zero to get those interesting forces to be applied. So it's an interesting breakthrough. And it's called LK99 from Lee and Kim, who are the two researchers that have basically created this. Let's see what this has to do with UFOs and technology and the government and stuff. I swear it's all related. This is going to be a wild swing. Let's start with this. Okay. So this is there's even a Wikipedia article. Oh, let's pull this up first. Okay. Great. Let's have a little peek at this, shall we? And so there you go. Here is our article. I was just having a little read there, and I see that it's basically just two substances. They say here it's a gray-black polycrystalline compound made by doping lead apatite with copper. Apatite is how it's pronounced, I think. And a team from Korea University led by Sukabae Lee and Jihoon Kim began evaluating this material as a potential superconductor starting in 1999. In 2023, they published papers claiming that it acts as a room temperature superconductor, which basically is also a superconductor at ambient pressure. As of August 8th, the scientific community has not validated the superconductivity of LK99 at any temperature through peer-reviewed process or independent replication by other research groups. So basically here, sorry, apologies. Now, basically here, what's really super interesting to me is that although this hasn't been proven a viable thing, everyone's freaking out. If you look at the news, for example, it's just like story after story. Let me just pull this up. You can see here. If we just say news, you'll see that everyone's writing about it. Sky and the Telegraph and New York Post, Washington Post. So it's gained some real traction, this whole LK99 thing. And the implications are basically that two simple substances prepared in a certain way will give you a superconductor at room temperature at ambient pressure, which means that nothing loses any electrical charge through heat. You get perfect conservation of electrical circuits. And with that, you also get very strange possible effects, which they go through. Now, what's super interesting here is let's actually have a look at the patents. Patent here. And Now, the actual patent, I must admit, is in Korean, as it is fitting for people coming from Korea. So, you know, unfortunately, it looks a bit like this. Which, for those of you that can read Korean, that's fantastic. But we have to rely on the translations that they sort of give us. See here sort of the structures that they use and the results that they publish. But what's interesting here is that it's basically a simple procedure with fairly simple ingredients, technically speaking, that allow you to do some really amazing things, if this is true. If this is true. But what I found interesting, and linking us back to the whole UFO field, is that if you click here on the patents that were cited, you'll see here piezoelectricity induced room temperature superconductor by none other than good old Salvador Cesar Paez, which I found super interesting. Now, Salvador Cesar Paez has got an incredible sort of catalog of patents that are very far out. As you can see, this one is also sort of to do with a piezoelectricity and room temperature superconductors. And some of his other work actually involves high-frequency gravitational wave generator, craft using inertial mass reductive device. This one, people love it because the image, I mean, what does that look like to you? And if your answer isn't the TRB Aurora, then I don't know what. It's amazing, right? So, Salvador Cesar Paez is an interesting fellow, deep involved in this beyond next generation technology. And you know, he's quite well renowned. He's not someone who's been cast to the fringe. He's still very actively sought in the community and studying this cutting edge technology. Now, I want to make clear here that although this is cited by the examiner, meaning that the team from Korea probably have no idea that they've been linked to this, that's fair. I'm not saying that that in itself is a bombshell revelation, but just the fact that in a legal capacity, the patent office said, well, hold on, these two things are related. These two people have similar research avenues. And they would know, they're the experts that class these patents that get filed. Now, not all patents make sense, you know, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt, and they're still testing. As I said, furnaces across the world must be burning right now trying to get to the bottom of this LK99 reproduction. But Salvador Paez recently this week has also confirmed that he, along with here's his Wikipedia, he, along with Kurt Jaimungal, who's got an excellent podcast called The Theory of Everything, they said that they were themselves trying to do this replication and live stream it. So he confirms that Salvador Cesar Paez is actually trying to replicate these things. So he's aware of this big revelation and trying this technology himself. And so whether he was not directly cited, just being cited and in his own capacity coming publicly and saying, I'm trying to cut to the bottom of this, is very interesting to me. And we don't really have much, I'll admit. I mean, like, for example, here's the alien scientist, he's a good sort here on Twitter. And he posts this video, which is just, it doesn't really doesn't really show
go ahead.
much, but basically,
Video.
yeah, it's supposed to display some of the effects that a superconductor would.
Angle a lot.
So that's very interesting, and sort of good luck to him. But this LK99 business being supported, and sorry, let me just before we do anything else, actually show you some of the other. I thought I had the video of the actual team's example, but I'm afraid I don't. Anywho, you'll easily find it on the internet. It's not a it's not a problem at all. Now, the thing I want to just mention here is, as we can see that there is a link between pyres and this LK99 superconductive material, because superconductivity gives us this quantum locking. It allows things to sort of levitate in some amazing way. There's some really cool videos that you can watch, watching something quantum locked spin at very high speeds, but still maintain zero friction, but some kind of connection to its surface. It's amazing. Incredible. And some have speculated, is this alien technology slowly coming out and making its way into the public domain? And I might argue that that's possible. Now, I'm not saying that Cesar Paez is involved in UFO programs and, his stuff is UFO tech, or that it's reversed from there, but let me just say he keeps very interesting company. And I will also just say that this isn't the first time that this would happen. And in the spirit of also trying to show you the disclosure has come not once, not twice, but many times, I'd like to just maybe cast our minds back to Philip J. Corso, who was, he's a person that outranked Grusch. I mean, he's no longer with us, unfortunately, but in terms of his experience and level of command, his testimony is, in a certain sense, literally out of this world. So I'd like to speak to you about Philip Corso, because there as well he speaks about how the military was supposed to get this technology, reverse engineer it, give it to the aerospace, basically the private sector. He says they could have the patents, it's no problem, but those patents must then benefit American industry and the world. And it seems that somewhere along the line that didn't happen. It just kept itself hidden, And before we jump into Philip Corso, the one thing I just want to mention is, Philip Corso was basically quiet for many years. We didn't know much about anything relating to Philip Corso until he basically came out with a book. And unfortunately, this book has been picked apart, of course, and rightfully so. And there are many inconsistencies. It seems that the book has been embellished, and the other thing to note is that Philip Corso's story has also had a few holes, and it has changed over time. That is true. But I think for his age, and given that he says, I only came out with this once, the general that told me I had to hold my secret until his death had passed away, then I came forward, and that's why I didn't even tell my family about any of this. The interesting point I want to make with Philip Corso is that, again, even if you think everything he says is a lie, his testimonies over the years in his book and his involvement in this big topic of military secrecy and ET presence has brought out many avenues of previously unknown and unresearched information. So it's led us to new things. The plot has thickened with Philip Corso, and as I said, he's held a very high level of of office. I mean, literally, he's been an intelligence officer, Army R&D. And if you don't know his story, he's basically one of the people that not only saw the files for the crash at Roswell and some other places, which came with some autopsy reports, but he eventually did see a body himself. And he'll probably talk about that. And his testimony about the detail of everything is very fascinating. And he claims that a lot of this information came directly from that, that a lot of this technology, is what I meant to say, came directly from that crashed series of craft in Nevada at the time. Fiber optics, lasers, all kinds of things. We'll have a look. If you really want to get a good grasp of Philip Corso, what I recommend is not so much looking at his book, which is not bad. It's good. It's interesting. There's some good things in there. But as I say, it has been embellished by his writers. What you do want to maybe get your hands on is the actual notes that Philip Corso laid it down, which, believe it or not, it only came out in 2003 from some Italian publication that bought the rights to it or something, and is only recently now, in the last few years, surfaced in English. And it's called Dawn of a New Age by Philip J. Corso. In fact, I'll be able to pull it up quite easily. Hold on a sec here. Let me do y'all a solid. Here we go. Booyaka. Okay. So, this is Dawn of a New Age by Philip J. Corso. It's fairly substantive. It's like 90-something pages. You know, there's a lot in here, but I'll just sit for a moment on the table of contents just to give you a rundown. There's a few interesting things here that Philip Corso talks about, and I'll actually play you some videos so you can hear some of this in his own words, okay, because that's very, very interesting. But you will see here that he talks about, you know, the Roswell incident and the golden age of research and development, R&D. He talks about, for example, lasers, DNA, and different other views for the future generations, which is what he sort of finishes with. But in this book, there were so many things. For example, you can see there, Project Horizon. Well, what was Project Horizon? Project Horizon was a very classified program that never came to fruition, but it was the attempts for the United States, here we go, to try and create a moon base. And I mean, they had this super plan. They knew how many rockets it was going to take, what they needed to build, where they needed to build it. And you can see the wiki article here says, was a 1959 study to determine the feasibility of constructing a scientific military base on the moon, at the same time as the US Department of the Army and Navy and Air Force had total responsibility of the US space program plans. So now, remember, this is 1959. This is before the official space race, and the military is already thinking about putting a base on the other side of the moon. Keep that kind of swishing in your mind. You know, although it sort of terminated in 1966, which is sort of an interesting time, we learn these kinds of things through people like Corso, you know? Now, Philip Corso basically had these super high levels of involvement in the military during the time of the downed crafts in Roswell. And he was underneath General Arthur G. Trudeau, who was the big shot. He often speaks about him in his book. Now, in his memoirs, he speaks about quite a lot of really interesting things. As I said, most of it relating to technology. That's one of the topics of this story time. You can see here on this page here, he's talking about the fiber optics. Let's zoom in there. He says, at the Roswell crash, what was thought to be broken wiring harnessed broken wiring harness was found. But it was noted that each of the broken ends emitted a different color. There was no wiring in the saucer. The color emitting was from a type of fiber optics. Bell Labs was in the forefront, and from this came the greatest advancements in communication that the world had ever seen. He also talks about things like the transistor, the integrated chip, and interesting technologies for fluid dynamics. Here's the section where he talks about transistors and integrated circuits, because this was the really big breakthrough. Because with this, we could start to advance computers and supercomputers, you see. And with that, we were able to advance medical technology, military technology, space technology, so on and so forth. And he claims we had in our possession a transistor with hair-like wires and leads, and a chip in a stack of thin, uniformly shaped wafer-like components. These formed complete electrical circuits and developed into the micromodule concept. CRD said it would take 50 years to develop the transistor and 200 years to develop the chip. It came in a short span of about 5 years. Dr. Herman Oberth said, "We have been helped by people from outer space. They applied engineering made possible to achieve ruggedness and the greater reliability and increasing operating speed and designs which take advantage of the automatic production methods. This led to today's supercomputers. In 1959, miniaturization of the circuits began, and by 1960, miniaturization. In 1961, advanced circuitry techniques and what do they got? They got sub, micro, and micro modules. There we go. From this, they got things like HARP. And if you don't know what HARP is, it's the High Altitude Research Project. Now it's got another A in it. It's HARP, High Auroral Atmospheric Research Program. But again, this is all directed energy stuff, you know. So the other interesting thing he mentions here is the psychochemicals. He reckons that from these technologies were also involved substances that allowed for instance amnesiatic effects and subduing of a person. In other words, you basically become unconscious and you can't remember anything. And it was labeled as the painless way to win the war. He also talks about lasers, and here we go. There's sort of a timeline here. Image intensifiers, lasers, fluid amplification, I don't know what that is. Psychochemicals, Project Horizon. He claims the Project Horizon book was 310 pages or something. I'd love to see the full version of it. Now, there are things in this book that in these notes that I found completely interesting, and it's maybe the last thing I'll mention before we jump straight into some of his video, is that, you know, Coroso is a military man, and so when he sees this technology and they begin reverse engineering, although he didn't find weapons, he's like, this stuff, although it's not destructive and the occupants don't seem armed, it still can completely interfere with even our most advanced nuclear missiles. So the asymmetric problem of force is still an issue there. And so as a military man, he looks at the problem as a hammer does. He sees it as a nail. It's a threat. It's a threat because they have no control over it. They're coming in and out of the airspace without any kind of control on behalf of humanity, and they're over nuclear, very secure nuclear facilities, and, you know, doing all kinds of things. And, you know, some people will even say abductions. Some people will even say more advanced things, space wars and people being harmed and medical procedures which we would think as torture being performed on people, and, you know, all kinds of really insidious things. So there's a spectrum here. We don't know what's what. But he says that the EBEs, these beings, are incredibly advanced, and their ability to manipulate DNA is second to none. So we need to be aware of these capabilities, because, just in case, they've got the ability to wipe out humankind. And he mentions in this book that the SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, what was known as sort of the Star Wars program, secretly and covertly, was a real and very active covert program to try and not only create a defense system during the times when the Soviets and the Americans were at the highest tensions possible, but also when they were now thinking, goodness, we're not the biggest fish in the pond. And he goes on to say that the Russians knew, and they had some kind of relationship in that regard, that if ever they were attacked, they would help each other. So at least let's hope that's still a thing. But as I said, it's a very long manual, but very worth reading. And Philip Corso is definitely a person who, throughout the years, has given us really good information. Grusch has told people has heard from people, and told people, and he hasn't had first-hand accounts. He hasn't worked in the programs and seen the bodies and touched the technology, been inside the vehicles like Corso has. So when Corso describes these things, we can validate them throughout the years. And much of it, as I said, checks out. It makes a lot of interesting links that we need to sort of follow. Now, the other thing I just want to mention here is that Corso talks about the Philadelphia experiments in this book, and he talks about the patents. We'll get back to this because, it goes so deep, because Sarbach is involved and many other scientists like Vannevar Bush with these technologies that revolve around Tesla's fundamental discovery of his idea of magnetism and the fields as they rotate, the effects that they kind of cause. We'll jump into that in just a moment, but let's hear good old Philip Corso in his own words, right? So, unfortunately, as I said, he came out with this information only in 1993 was his book. So we're looking at video that is quite dated, and my apologies, doesn't sound great, I don't think, if I remember correctly. So, we'll just do our best, and I'll try and point out the interesting parts of it. So let's bring that up on screen for y'all. That's good old Philip Corso there. Let me just see if I can make that a bit more natural. I don't know. Anyways, so Philip Corso in his own words. Now, I'm just going to jump across a little bit here.
Knowing about UFOs that crashed in different parts of the world, and they were buzzing our planes and so forth. I know about them, but I didn't know about the Roswell crash then. I learned about the Roswell crash when I was stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas, and I was the duty officer that night. That meant I was in charge of the security of the whole area, including the inspection of the guards, every place where they were. So I went around about 2 or 3 in the morning to the veterinarian area, because we had horses at Fort Riley. And one of the sergeants that I knew was a sergeant of the guard. I used to bowl with him. And I told him, Sergeant, how's everything going? They told me at headquarters that this area was very secure.
So
he said, yes, come on, Colonel. He said, I want to show you something. So he took me back.
I'm not going to let him tell the whole story, because it's as I said, he's written a whole book about it. But what I do want to maybe jump to is, let's see if I can find it very quick.
So when I start putting all this on the extraterrestrial together, we find clones. And so the name came out, extraterrestrial biological entity. That's what we figured they were.
The EBE, that's where that came from.
We never used the letters ET. There was no such thing.
You said that they look like clones.
They were clones. not look like clones, they were clones. We figured
So they didn't look like clones, they were clones, that he says. And what I found interesting about that is that many other people have come forward and said something similar. Corso says that these are clones because they have no sexual organs. If something can't recreate itself, then it suggests that it's a clone. And also, if it's got an exactness in it and its sort of DNA lineage, then you can tell that these things are clone based.
that they were created by some other intellect. And we also came to the decision that they were made specifically to travel in space. Because we knew even in those days that man could not travel in space. His bones are affected, his muscles are affected, his brain is affected. Man cannot travel in space. So we came to the conclusion these creatures, whatever they are made to travel in space.
He describes them as insect-like, sort of, maybe because of the high G-forces that they sometimes need to pull, but also because everything needs to be hardened in space for the radiation that they come across. So let's listen a little bit further, where I guess here-ish, more or less. Let's see.
And that thing on the movie, people ask me, I told there was some truth to that, because they pulled out an eyelid, and no one knew about it, don't know about it. And only I know about it because
So I'm just grubbing here a little.
Where they came from, where they were.
So the airfield we're referring to is Roswell, the 509?
No, I wouldn't call it Roswell, but I knew about 509, the atomic weapons.
So 509's J.C. Marcel, and they're the ones that discovered the Roswell incident.
The references of the crash in Roswell, I figured, well, it had to come from there.
What were the three things? You said the eyelid was one, the lens. What were the other two?
The brain. It had 4 lobes in it, different from ours.
And the third thing?
Yeah, so he says the brain had 4 lobes in it, which I found interesting, Interesting thing to say.
The other thing were the striated muscles.
Number of different crash sites throughout the world. I'm more interested in 1947, around that period of time. Were you privy to any other crash sites?
No, it wasn't Socorro. It was down St. Augustine. There was a talk about something down at Kirkland or Holloman. So the documents were available to me to look at and read. I had incidents. They wrecked several planes. At Valstrom Air Force Base, they knocked out
You could find.
not that we could find, but the damage was
Here we go. I found it. Sorry, it took me a little bit of time. Apologies.
That would.
No, the damage was caused by electromagnetism in those craft. No weapon. We came across no weapons.
So Corso here is basically going to talk about the downcraft having no weapons when he went inside.
We came across, but it wasn't exactly a weapon. It was a cutting tool, like it.
They had no offensive weapons that you could find.
Not that we could find, but the damage was caused. We knew this.
Okay, could you state that?
There was no weapons as we saw in the flying saucers. But the weapon that they did have was electromagnetic type weapons which could knock out our guidance systems, knock out our missiles. In fact, von Braun even said that they threw our missiles off a trajectory.
That's very interesting that he even says von Braun knew about these things, knew these things. And the last thing I'm going to just point out here in the article,
Was it one
not
of
article in this video.
ours that we were trying to test, or was it captured?
It wasn't ours.
Okay.
Now, we did experiments, and I know about, on flying saucers, the Avro one, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, we hadn't perfected the propulsion system or the guidance system. And I think the reason for that, because the extraterrestrial himself is the guidance system. And we never figured on that. We never thought that an extraterrestrial, a humanoid, could be a guidance system in himself.
So, for those of you that maybe missed what he said there, he said that we basically struggled to get the propulsion system to work. We could sort of power up the craft, but to actually get them to fly properly required the connection between the being in some way with the craft. Consciousness was somehow linked to this craft. They were sort of one thing, or linked in some psychic way. Very interesting. Now, in further years, Coroso came out with some other testimonies and interviews and things like that. And the other one I want to bring your attention to is one that he did in 1997. So the one you saw there, that was in about 94, 95. Now we're going to jump ahead a little bit to one he did in 1997. And he makes some very interesting comments as to why these beings are actually even here, So let me bring that up on screen for you.
Facts on a crash flying saucer, which we used the word applied engineering. Was Dr. Teller was still alive, knows magnetism and the ICBMs, and it came from this.
Imagine the scientists and technicians and the companies that worked on this stuff are not real happy with your version of history.
No, I haven't heard anything. In fact, I've heard from scientists, at least a dozen of them since then, and they're supporting everything in the book. They say it's true. In fact, I just got a letter before I left from McDonald's nephew, or son, and he told me that a lot of people come from IBM, from the Hughes, and from the White Pageant Air Force, and said that I filled some of the holes in which they've been wondering about for many years. And I just got this the day I left home, 2 days yesterday.
So is there any question, that elements of our military, our government, have known for a long time that UFOs are real, they're from somewhere?
Oh, sure they do. I know certain in 1947, well, in 1947, no, I'll back up. I saw the body then. I didn't see UFOs. The UFOs came into the picture later years, 10 years later, for me. And also I worked out the omissions weren't in the UFOs. In fact, George, I've even told you, I think, that I was not interested in seeing UFOs. I was all interested in what was in those UFOs. I told them I'm not interested in seeing something fly in the air, but I like to know what's inside that thing.
Did you physically handle the artifacts from
Oh yeah, I had them. They were in my possession.
What things did you have? What did
So he goes into some of the artifacts that he was able to back engineer. And, he goes, again, through pains to say that this information was supposed to be, they didn't care about the patents. They just wanted the patents to be given to the private sector so that it could then be put into the public. And it never did.
Yeah.
I had an integrated circuit, like the size of a quarter. I had a bunch of wires. Colors were coming out of it. I don't say wires. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know if they were wires or anything. They actually, I didn't know what they were. They just were emitting light. I had a piece of metal. Atoms were lined in it. So tough, paper thin, you couldn't break it, bend it, or anything. I had super tenacity fibers. That was, atoms were lined in it. You couldn't burn it, you couldn't cut it. And later on, the nearest thing in this world that we found that was a spider web. There's a spider spins an atomic aligned web.
People say military can't keep a secret. There's no way a secret like this could be kept.
We kept a secret one way. We had to keep a secret for two reasons. One was a climate opinion within our own government.
Let me just repeat that. The climate of opinion within our own government. It means that there's political pressure to not go ahead with this decision to disclose to public. So, again, this is Philip Coroso talking about the 1940s, 1950s.
The people higher up in the government didn't like the military or the army. And if you remember, in those days, NASA took space. We did Project Horizon in '59. Part of it's in the book. First 50, that's 310 pages long. We were going to put a military colony on the moon. They took that away from us. They took atomics from us. With atomic engine, but we still kept developing atomics, and we did the ion engine and some other things that maybe the world could use today. like the portable atomic installation went to McMurdo Air Force Base, made 10.
So what he says is that basically they also developed a device that was a sub-kiloton platform, basically a little nuclear engine, a la Fallout, for those of you that have played the game, but basically a power plant that was small enough that you could put in a house, or even smaller, but could give you the output of a nuclear efficiency power plant production system.
28 million gallons of water a day, 10 million in 4 years. Then when they came back, they destroyed on us. We did the first heart pump. We did some atomic, that took nitrogen in the air and made a fuel you could run an automobile from it. And they used Pu-238, what we used. And most of the probes that went to Mars and Saturn and so forth, and Jupiter, where our little engine was in those. The Soviets stole it, some of their spies. In fact, I have satellites up in space going right today, but they're leaking.
So the last thing I'm just going to end off here is this end bit that he says in his speech. Let's see if we can find it.
I'll give you an example of what happened. I had a file on von Neumann's file on artificial intelligence. It was called Project Rainbow, and I did nothing with it. And I should have done something with it, but I put it in the file and left it there. But the supercomputer was not developed yet. Look what's happened. Look at the imaging devices in hospitals. Those imaging devices saved my life just a few months ago when I was operated on for my stomach and I used hernia. We started a heart pump. Look what developed from that. So I hope that these developments continue, and that we're not, say, harmed by politics or petty jealousies, that they continue with scientists the way they should continue. We did them. We happened to do it. I think we succeeded in a way. But you see how why we had to keep it quiet, because of the forces, interaction, the forces. We couldn't give it to CIA and say this is the book, because we thought we had to keep this from the Soviet. When Roswell happened, Stalin gave instructions to get this in from whatever happened there, get the information. We were confronted with the KGB and the Soviet Union, at the time an enemy, and we were confronted like, as I say, people criticize me, they say, well, you're kooky. I told them, well, I'm in good company. General Marshall, General Trudeau, General MacArthur, von Braun, Olbert, Wilbur Smith from I told them, I'm in good company. That's the company I'd rather be in, with those kooks.
Those are all people.
Oh, bless his cotton socks. Good old Philip J. Corso. And the really outstanding thing that he says there in that article is that, well, not in that article, in that presentation he was giving, in that interview that was being conducted with him, that essentially he feels that his generation did manage to get some of the technology out into the public, but he couldn't trust the CIA. He couldn't trust some of the other political forces internally that were trying to suppress and divert and control. And this is why, again, the topic of this StoryTime episode 21 is deep state schism. There is something major going on, and it's linked to this technology. You know, and as I said, there's been disclosure for many years now. If you want to go back, like, let's say, thinking, if you want to maybe look at the time around the 80s, you know, that's sort of where I'm more familiar, having being a little bit older than most. I think that time there was also super interesting because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have mass media held by a few select companies. Times were different, so disclosure was also, you know, kind of like wild at that point as well. But it didn't take hold in society and in the politics, and so laws didn't change and things didn't get disclosed, and we just saw the same plain sailing story. Now it's a little bit different. But let's look a little bit then, for example. You know, we saw in the we saw in the interviews that we had with some of the guys that have come forward in the congressional hearings about their testimonies, and you'll see here that this isn't the first time that we've had these exact same stories kind of coming forward. Let's see if I can bring this up on screen for you. Hopefully it's at the right point, more or less. This is from an old show where
dead alien bodies, just aircraft property. We found a couple of corpses. Apparently a UFO had been caught in a thunder and lightning storm while in the area. The next day, Brazil's upon a mile
downcraft
bodies called extraterrestrial biological entities, EBEs if you wish. We got reports that they appeared to be small humanoid bodies with large hairless heads, wearing one-piece seamless gray skin-like clothing. We assume they must.
So this is Stanton Friedman. He's a very well-renowned UFO researcher, and he's the one that gave us some insight into the Twining memo. So that's also very, very big point of controversy, but one that also has opened up many doors of research, let's just say.
Have ejected from their craft with some kind of ejection capsule.
The Air Force came and recovered the bodies and took them away for autopsies.
Gentlemen, autopsies, EBEs, this is rather unsettling information. Level with us. What do we know to be fact?
So doesn't that just sound exactly like Ross Coulthard when he interviewed Grusch? Like, oh, now I'm scared. You're saying that these alien beings come from another world and, you know, do these things with, you know, possibly have, you know, hurt humans and maybe murdered them. Ooh, you know. This is mind-blowing information. It's exactly like Ross Coulthard in 2023.
We know these are the facts. A very strange spacecraft exploded. Pieces of the craft were recovered. Several bodies were found and removed along with the wreckage. We can prove the story was covered up very quickly at the highest level and given a classification above top secret. Flying saucers are real, period.
The first person sent by the Air Force to investigate the crash site and to take care of the wreckage was a Major Jesse Marcel. Let's meet his son, Dr. Jesse Marcel, who was 12 years old at the time and, needless to say, has never forgotten that incident.
So this is the son of the guy you saw holding the weather balloon, and we went through in a previous story time how his account later on, he gave testimony that those materials were swapped out and they began the project of disinforming the public to keep secret what was happening in all these areas around the Nevada test sites, because that's where the nuclear, remember, Jesse Marcel was part of the 509th, which was the bomber division, the only nuclear capable bomber section of the Air Force in the 1940s and 50s. So those were the guys that dropped the atomic bomb, you know, and funny enough, we were actually just past the cusp of Hiroshima and Nagasaki's remembrance recently. So how funny is that? You know, that was the 509th that dropped those weapons, and this is his son coming forward. But Jesse Marcel was very deeply involved and came forward and said those materials, you know, I took them home, played them on the kitchen table. We looked at them at the base, we looked at them everywhere. I knew that these were not ours. I was involved in every kind of special material involved in the Air Force at the time, because, you know, those were the ones going into the bombers that had to do the super secret nuclear program. So that's Jesse Marcel's son that's about to step up here. Let's have a quick listen.
Welcome, Dr. Marcel. Nice to see you.
Jesse.
Bill. Jesse. Doctor, tell us, if you will, about the night your dad came home from that crash site.
My father came home with his car loaded with debris after investigating the crash site. He brought the material into the house where he, my mother, and I sorted through the stuff. Among the litter was a foil-like sheathing alloy. It was metallic and it looked like the skin of an aircraft, but it was unlike anything I had ever seen. Also, there was an I-beam about 1 foot to 1.5 foot in length, about 1/2 inch across. The inner surface had hieroglyphic-like symbols on it, like Egyptian symbols, as I recall them.
And what was the Air Force's explanation of all this?
The explanation was that a weather balloon had crashed.
Their explanation was a weather balloon had crashed. So again, you know, this is the 1980s. These are people coming forward. Stanton Friedman, it was also part of hearings and public studies with real information being documented in a scientific way. This was a big deal back then. And here's another one. I think we remember our good friend George Knapp. He's now still part of the congressional group giving testimony to Congress. Sorry, he's part of the group giving congressional hearing with Grusch and Greaves and Fravor. And let's just see here. He's deeply involved in this now as he was back then. And, you know, he's given us a lot of good stuff at the start of his career. He's been absolutely fantastic. But at the same time, he's also, you know, I was saying this in the previous story time, you know, maybe he's reached a point of his career where he just wants to put a you know, full stop at the end of the story. And that's why he's now linked himself with all these CIA obsters. It's the only reason I can sort of think that, you know, maybe he's also fallen into the trap that only they can give you disclosure. But, you know, this was him asking really pertinent questions back in 1987. And now the person he was interviewing here is John Lear. John Lear, the son of the Learjet company, and you know, quite a renowned person, and again part of the aerospace and aviation industry. So this is George Knapp back in 1987. My goodness.
Monsters from outer space. The government has been telling us for years that they're not real. They're weather balloons, or swamp gas, or reflections from the sun, or the ravings of lunatics. But serious UFO researchers say a breakthrough may be very close. Some of the government scientists who worked on the top-secret project Blue Book are ready to talk.
Bentwaters, and I said, oh, Bentwaters, that's where the aliens get out. And there was also the tape, Colonel Halt tape Forrest, and being worried, saying...
So I'm just looking for a specific point here. Please forgive me one moment.
The things after us, but the press doesn't want to deal with.
If so many people, and you've told me about this before, have seen it or seen these aliens, why haven't some of them come forward?
A lot of them have come forward, but they're just not getting any press. It's something that people just don't want to deal with, the press doesn't want to deal with, and people aren't going to listen to something unless Dan Rather or any of your big press people are going to tell them about it.
And isn't that true even now? We think that maybe it's really taking hold because of social media and big news, really getting the message across with these congressional hearings and laws are changing. Maybe now it's really kicked off, you know. Back then he was saying it really isn't doing any justice to the people that are willing to come forward with information. The media is just not picking up on it. And the other thing Lear says here, he kind of lays out his view about the aliens and why they're here, and it sounds so similar to some of the big mind-blowing testimonies that are coming forward now through anonymous people like Gray and Grusch and his sources. So let's have a listen.
And they're just too spooked. The Air Force has made an art form of ridiculing people who have talked about this thing. They've done an excellent job of covering it up for the last 40 years. George, basically what we're dealing with here is, I'll give you the bottom line.
Okay.
I'm not trying to sell it.
I want to hear your thesis.
I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm not trying to promote a lecture. This is based on what I've come across after intense research in the last year. And I have found out that the government has retrieved between 10 and 15 actual flying saucers, 3 of which have been in perfect condition, 1 of which they tried to fly. They have between 30 and 50 alien bodies in cryogenic storage. We even have the name of the person whose job it is to show these bodies to the heads of state and the people who are authorized to see them. They represent at least 5 different civilizations.
I can't imagine a Dan Rather or a Tom Brokaw, if that were to come to their attention, a story of that magnitude, that they wouldn't do something with it.
Well, I can't answer that question. I don't know why they don't do it. There certainly is enough evidence based on what I've looked at For instance, the Linda Moulton Howe documentary.
Okay, so I'm not going to let that run much further because he gets into his whole spiel, and the documentary in reference is actually excellent. It was one of the first about cattle mutilations and has some really good data that's still being referenced to this day. You know, that's John Lear. That's a really credible, well, not credible, but that's a very upstanding person that has, you know, a very big corporate empire that is affected by his beliefs in this kind of thing. And back in the 1980s, he was already saying we got recovered craft, 3 of which are good. One, you know, it's exactly like what Bob Lazar said. And in fact, speaking of Bob Lazar, you know, he also came out in the 80s and brought his stories out in the 90s. So, you know, when we're talking about disclosure and how did the technologies work, you know, let's listen to Bob Lazar. Just now, what's great about this video that I'm about to show you is you're about to see Bob Lazar rock up in a Corvette. Let me just mute that for a second. And in this video, I'm apologizing to everyone. It is incredibly grainy. It's basically super old. I think it's like 360p basically. But he shows up here in his like Corvette a la Knight Rider style. And basically says, you know, I'm Bob Lazar. This is what I did. Here's where I worked at the Los Alamos laboratories and a couple of other places. And I ended up in a place called S4. And in this video, he talks about not only S4 and, you know, how that's south of Groom Lake and how they were doing all these crash retrieval reversal of the craft. What's interesting is he lays out this video into 2 halves. One is the stuff he has personal account with. In other words, you know, he personally has had his hands on, worked with, etc., etc. The second half is the speculation he's heard or thinks, and there's not much of that towards the end. But what I want to show you is that, you know, when he goes through these lectures, he answers very big questions. He's like, well, how do they get here? What is the propulsion mechanism? You know, these are fundamentals. If your person was supposed to come out of some secret government facility and know how this technology works, you would think that they'd be able to explain it. And Bob Lazar goes quite a large distance. I'll give you the thrust of it. Basically, he says that through reactors they make element 115. It's not on our periodic table because they have to create it, and it has a very, very small or short half-life. It basically decays almost instantaneously. But there is an isotope of it that is stable. And once you get the stable isotope, you can make 115, and 115 allows you to manipulate the second force of gravity. He calls it gravity A and B, which is basically the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force. And he says the strong nuclear force is the thing that bonds atoms. And if you get certain elements, the field of this strong gravitational force extends beyond the atom itself and can therefore be amplified and directed, and that's kind of like the whole thing to it. And let's have a little listen here.
A level of technology that man has not yet achieved. The truth of the matter is that traveling these distances does require a level of technology that man has not yet achieved. But it has nothing to do with flying in a linear mode near the speed of light. We know that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, so in our universe we've always assumed that the fastest way from point A to B was to travel in a straight line at the speed of light. Well, the fact is that when you're dealing with space-time and you enjoy the capability of generating an intense gravitational field, the fastest way from point A to B is to distort or warp or bend the space-time between point A and B, bringing point A and B closer together. The more intense the gravitational field, the greater the distortion of space-time and the shorter the distance between points A and B.
So there you have it. It's just an example. I really recommend that you go watch the whole video. But again, you see, these scientists are interested in trying to get this information out there, whether Lazar is an obster or not. These are testable hypotheses that do have some grounding. If you look at how those patents worked at the beginning with warp fields and things like that through superconductors or some manifold manipulation, this all goes back to Tesla. Because Tesla was the first one to sort of discover this torsional tensor being manipulated with electromagnetics and that effect it has on gravity. That's why he had such a completely different view of just how physics worked. And, you know, all of this, as I said, is in the 80s, and we're talking about technologies, and we're talking about, you know, only now we're sort of rediscovering this, and it's a bit of a nonsense situation, if you ask me. I mean, I'm happy that now we've come back at it, and it seems we've just pushed past a certain barrier, but the disclosure is still thick with psy-upping all over the place, but at least we're making some kind of headway. And as we come back to the here and now of today, this is where I want to sort of begin to finish up this whole session of Storytime, episode 21, because we were saying that the technology is really what they're after. The technology is what governs this whole secrecy thing. For example, let me just pull this up on screen. You know, it's like they've got these operation manuals for what to do with, you know, this is from the Majestic Group. If you look at the index, I mean, they know exactly, you know, they've had like a manual about what to do with these organisms, how to recover the craft. This is 1940 something. You know, fast forward 70 years, we need to keep in mind that this secret has been bubbling below the surface all this time, and I think now it's exploded. And this is why you're seeing the left hand not speaking to the right hand politically. And from this we can only see political fireworks begin to unravel. Hopefully not military fireworks. The military will be affected, no doubt, but as I said, now we're going to start to see things not only accelerate but intensify, and unfortunately that also means politically speaking. So that is where we have this tension, because, you know, one of the things that Grusch also said is that there's been some kind of political links with these extraterrestrials, that we might have some agreements back from way back since Eisenhower, Project Serpo, your exchanges with the Zeta Reticuli. I mean, the story is crazy. Or it can be very, very advanced, but the whole thing of this is that we are being kept from the truth, and the implications, even if a little bit of that is really true, changes the whole way that we look at the universe. And the forces that have governed this knowledge, they care about the technology, and they hold that from us. And now that some of this technology is beginning to leak out, and I'm not saying that LK99 is UFO technology, but I'm just saying, Coroso's pointed out, you know, fiber optics, integrated circuits. There was a big boom in the 60s of technology. You know, how they got to the moon like so quickly when they were like losing the space race. But all of this should be helping humanity and coming through the private sector, but some are concealing it. Coin Intel Pro, MK Ultra, all these things were there to confuse and subvert and control humanity. This technology is incredibly powerful. It can really create a control that humans cannot shake themselves from. And that's why certain nefarious parts of the military and government and whoever really want to get their hands on it and control it and keep it secret. But now, and as has been in the past, the public and parts of the government, at least the ones that are elected and honest, are saying, what's going on here? Why are we, as the people who are funding all of this, not in control of this? And why is this pointed towards us as such a existential threat? You know, you're saying these things are a threat to our national security, but, you know, they haven't committed mass genocide like the militaries of our continents have. So the whole thing kind of falls flat on its face when these guys in government try to give us disclosure, and we've had it so many times, and people have said as much in so many ways with, you know, really high credibility. I mean, you know, the Russians, for example, when we went to Mars and they lost contact with Phobos, so when we went to Mars, when they sent a probe called Phobos 2 to the moon of Mars, the Phobos 2 lander lost contact, and in the last few frames that it sent back to base station, it was incredible. We saw basically a cigar-like craft that cast a shadow on the planet, and it seemed to be coming towards the probe. And then, you know, who brought this forward to us, this incredible revelation, was Marina Popovich. Here she is here, holding up one of the frames from the final Phobos images. Here's another one. Again, these are very grainy. They come from Russia back in, like, who knows when. But this is the surface of Phobos, and the strange 20-kilometer long cigar-like unidentified object that seemed to be coming towards the reconnaissance thing itself. This is the shadow it cast on the sorry, it was the Mars moon. Sorry, no, this was Mars. This is cast on the Martian surface in the final 3 frames. Now, the Russians said we lost contact with this thing. We did see something. I mean, it didn't go very forward, but back then there was this information available to many countries for them to have brought people forward and created really good grounding in a public fashion. But now the people running the show are the CIA and the intelligence officials in the military. They're the ones giving you true disclosure. So as they battle the people that are a little bit more sane, a little bit more responsible, and elected in some way responsible to the public, this tension is going just off the hinges politically. And one of the biggest things, you know, we speak often about continuation of government on this program. So this is where I'm going to sort of end off. It's something I just want to make clear, that I do not follow any anything. And there obviously is a large group of those people that feed a narrative into this. But I'm just going to give you the parts that are to me interesting, because in this program we speak often about continuation of government, and we speak often about how all of the military secrets go to these secret executive orders and chains of command that supersede constitutions. The whole point of these UAP programs coming to light and causing problems is that they are illegal and they're not being oversighted. And this is the same sort of thing. Continuation of government, parts of it are so secret and so unconstitutional, and there's no oversight, that it's part of the same ilk. It's part of the same level of secrecy and same level of sociopaths that seek to control everything, even above laws of man and natural laws given to us by our creators, you know, or creator, as you please. Now, what I'm referring to here is there's been a clip that came out recently by this would be one of Trump's former political campaign managers, and she is quite a piece of work. Her name is Jan Helper Hayes. I don't know if she has any relation to Avril Hayes, but that's you know, worth a check. But anyway, she came on a British talk show, GB News, and they had this very interesting exchange. Now, I'm pointing this out again. Remember, keep the focus here. I know the moment people start mentioning Trump and the Trump campaign and lies and insurrection and all of this, it goes a bit crazy. The point that she's trying to make here are two things. One is that she feels that she has now been given, or not her, but Trump has now been given the grounds to make his statements in court and have the powers to subpoena people, because it's going to go straight to the Supreme Court. And she says that Trump's argument will be that under his presidency, he signed some executive orders that separated a very vital mechanism of the way the founding of America has sort of changed into this relationship with the Federal Reserve and the banking systems and essentially the British Crown. So it's very far out, but there's some truth here, because some people still to this day argue if there is such a thing as the United States and the United States of America, you know, the we the people side of America and the corporation of America. In some tax laws, it does state that America is sort of a part of a can be defined as a corporation, and in some cases is treated as such. Now, I've not personally been able to, I'm not an expert in this, I'll say that outright. But it's interesting, because it does bring us to an interesting pond. I mean, a very deep pond. It's not just a little shallow creek here. This is something deep that many people are still debating, and people of the highest orders, including Trump and others, have tagged Jan's comments as, yes, that's perfect. She's speaking the truth. I can't wait, to basically go to court. So there must be something here, unless they're completely out of their minds. We'll see in court, but at least they must have some kind of legal argument. There's some little grain of truth here. And so what they're basically pulling out is an executive maneuver to somehow bring the president back as the chief in commander of the entire military and government, and to stop all this corruption. And part of that corruption are these illegal programs that are running amok. So let's hear what she has to say. This is from GB News, Great Britain News. Let's just have a quick listen here.
Well, let's talk to Jan Halper-Hayes, who's a US political analyst, and he's here in the studio. Good to see you, as always.
Good to see you.
There's so many people putting this down as a political conspiracy theory, but actually there are real questions to be answered here.
There are?
Yeah, of course there are.
I mean, as I said, she's a piece of work. They're like, there are? Yes, there are. No, of course there are. And so let's see what she says, going a little bit further.
What was going to happen was they were going to go after him for treason or sedition, but they did criminally charge him, but they didn't go to that extreme. As a result, he has due process, so he can subpoena people and bring things in. Now, let me say something about this 2020 election, is that Biden is the legitimate president, but he's the legitimate president of what is now the bankrupt U.S. corporation.
And that's mind-blowing. Already there, we can just mic drop it. She's claiming that according to Trump, there is a distinction between the United States and the corporate Federal Reserve shell that makes it look like a country run by some kind of independent elected officials. Because remember, the Federal Reserve is not... It's not federal. it's not part of the government. It's a private group of people, and it's never been audited. Keep that in mind as an example of this thing that Trump is, in her words, trying to decouple. And it goes right back to the British Crown and the Civil War. It's crazy. Let's listen further.
And that was a treaty in 1871. Well, on September 12th, 2018, Trump created an executive order. Within that, he outlined in future elections any kind of foreign or domestic interference, specifically for the 2020 election. So we say, how did he know some of these things were going to happen? Election integrity on both sides of the aisle is tough. It's really tough. But what this has done is it's opened the door for Trump to present his case.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Because, I mean, what...
And he's exactly right. It's a good thing, right? Now, it's not in a way, because Trump is facing 500, 400 or something years in prison for some of the crimes he's allegedly committed. I mean, we still need to see this in court, that, you know, what's true or what's not. But criminally charging a president, it was always a major, major no-no in politics. You don't persecute. You shun them. You know, divest yourselves of criminal entities in your government. But arresting them creates too much of a precedent for a military junta to just, you know, create a coup. So let's listen a little bit further here, because he says, rightfully so, you know, this should be a good thing. But in a sense, I mean, I personally have never seen any world leader like Trump being so vilified everywhere, internationally as well. You know, I mean, even his generals were like, no, we won't give you the nuclear codes. We'll just tell China that you won't fire a nuke because we say so. It's crazy. So let's listen a bit further.
Mistake by Jack Smith, but actually he can subpoena. People can actually see evidence from both sides. That's a sensible move.
Exactly. And it's a great mistake by Jack Smith that he's done that. Absolutely great. See, the thing is, think about Edward Snowden and all the information he had. Think about the fact that our military, our Department of Defense Space Force, if you think that they don't have the actual real results from the election, then you're fooling yourself.
Yeah, but
so what she's saying there is Trump created different branches of the military during his tenure. One of them is the Space Force. In fact, sorry, it was the only branch he created, but an addendum to the other branches of the military. He also created many executive orders, and this is also why the UAP thing really picked up during this time, in my opinion at least. But she's saying here that Trump kind of had an awareness that there was an insidious force inside the state, and basically set up these channels. And obviously if you set them up yourself, you're choosing the people you want, and you have greater control over something that you've just put into action. And he says that from this, he thinks that these very capable intelligence services have all the goods, as they say, have all the goods on all the corruption. And now, because he's in court, he can bring it forward. Is this true or not? Well, that's the thing. It's going to go down to the court, and we will see. We will see.
What we do know with this is we're told that there are plenty of notes from people, including Vice President Pence, that there are some recordings of...
I'm just going to jump ahead here, because he's basically saying here that, you know, his political rivals basically say that, you know, he lied or knew things and didn't say that he knew them. And she basically says, well, look, you know, that's the claim, but we'll see.
That's illegal.
But you know what? That's what someone's claiming, but that's not the fact, and that's not what Donald Trump really has ever said. He's been very, very clear. I mean, the issues were, for example, in Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania stepped in and changed some of the election laws. Under our Constitution, it's only the state legislators that can do that. 2,000 Mules, the film that came out, what they did, they spent over $4 million tracking the phones. And the reason it's only 2,000 mules is that based on the visits to the drop boxes in Georgia, they had to have gone over 10 times. And they've got all the film for that. So the thing is that the election integrity is so different and so problematic in every single state. But that doesn't mean that the machines didn't do something, that there were some other kind of finagling, but the long and short... Go ahead.
Well, it doesn't, but that...
I just want to say here that she's getting a little bit long-winded, but you can see that smirk on her face. She's about to give us the long and the short of it. Let's hear.
Campaign trying to bring. Nothing's gone in his favour.
Okay, wait a minute. Everyone, the media goes, oh, there were 60 court cases that were rejected. No, there were 3. He won 2, he lost 1, 57 were never heard because they had no standing. And standing means that the person bringing the case has to claim some kind of impact or injury. So it's really, the media was a fallacy in there. And the thing is that, I sit on a task force at the Department of Defense. And the thing is, they've got the goods.
And there is the famous saying that is just making everyone spin completely out of control. What task force she's sitting on, I'm not too sure. She doesn't specify. But this task force, the intelligence services, there's nothing that they can't pick up electronically speaking, electromagnetically. They just have incredible senses. And she's like, well, we know with this election stuff and other things, just the level of fraud, and we can bring an almighty case forward. But the interesting thing she now mentions is about the gold and this decoupling from the crown. Let's go a little bit further.
They've got the goods, and Trump knew that if he presented any of the goods early on, we'd have a civil war. That he really felt that the people needed to see how bad it could get.
And that's the sense that we're getting from...
So, let's just hear a little bit further, because she talks about how there were secret flights coming out of Great Britain. He met with the Queen and he met with the Vatican, and neither of them were happy in those photos when they met. And her claim, Jan's claim here, is that there were secret flights hauling out all this gold. So let's have a listen.
Election result.
Oh, so that because you think he's being criticized because in Georgia he said, can you find me 12,000 votes? Or, the thing is, he didn't try to subvert anything. What he's really done is he set up the deep state to come out, and that's why we're seeing all these things. I mean, it was revealed with whistleblowers and Hunter Biden's ex-best friend that in 2015, the head of Burisma gave Joe and Hunter Biden $10 million bribe.
So that's good old Joe. I think I might have the clip here somewhere. Good old Joe saying, well, if that prosecutor didn't get fired, then you're not getting the money. And if you didn't think I have the authority, I got the president on speed dial. And then he says, son of a bitch, guy got fired, It was glorious. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, yes, I do have it on hand. So this is what Jan Halper was talking about.
I remember going over convincing our team, or others too, convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. And they put him, I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
They put in place somebody who was solid. And if you look in the background there, who's that? The Council of Foreign Relations. You can see he's really speaking his mind to his global overlords. Good old Joe Biden. Let's listen to Jan Halper Hayes here.
In 2018, Joe is on TV publicly saying that he threatened that unless they got the prosecutor fired, that Bill find out about what went on to get the prosecutor.
So we're almost out of time.
Of the Queen.
On one thing you said earlier on, Donald Trump has been very clear on this. Is he a man that you believe? I mean, look.
Thank God you got the negativity in at the end and not the beginning. I can always count on you for that.
Ultimate point to say can't be fair, but I mean, definitely.
Everything or always, because I do call him the embellisher. Us things, optics, you better believe that he's very much a straight shooter in terms of actions. And he broke. They made fun of him because they assumed he broke protocol and walked in front of the Queen. No, if you go back and look at it, you will see he looked at her. She gave a wave with her hand. He proceeded. She to join. That was an optic to tell us that he then was going to bankrupt the U.S. corporation because it was the Vatican, the Crown, and the U.S. that was part since 1871. And we were giving you our tax dollars. We were paying back. Forget this Tea Party and without taxation, without representation. We owed you a lot of money because you helped us in the Civil War. And so that is what Trump has now, he told the Queen, I'm ending this. We're dissolving this corporation. We're going to go back to being a republic and we'll all be separate. The Pope wasn't happy. You should find the picture of him visiting the Pope. It took $650 planes to remove our gold from the Vatican Bank.
I'm not very happy about it, Jan, to be perfectly honest. We could do with your money at the minute. Keep it flowing, I say.
So a little bit of a cackle at the end, but as I said, you can see that in that little clip I just played where he's met, that is, Trump is meeting with the Pope. His wife has got a black veil on, so usually that's funny because that's mourning. Usually you wear black in mourning. And you can see by the start it's all smiles, and by the end he doesn't look like a happy camper. So we have to see, what is this all about? Because, as I said, you can get quite a lot of resources that are available online to really get through this kind of information. And as I said, I'm not an expert. I don't know enough. But you can see here, for example, there are some that make this distinction between the United States, and the United States of America. And it's all about your birth certificate. And, even if you're not American, there's still this thing in the Vatican called unum sanctum, which also is a very similar idea, where they basically just want, everything to be under the church. Let me bring that on screen for you. So whilst you might read the Wikipedia article and be like, oh my God, this is so boring, it is basically this thing that everything, in order to belong to eternal salvation, will now belong to the church. And so there's this whole mechanism around your birth certificate and being born and dying and registering. And, this is all I want to close with. Things are getting wild. Information's getting wild. The technology's getting wild. The implications on our society and our religions just off the charts. But all in all, as this schism begins to let go and some of the technology starts to fly about and all of this, just remember that you are a free human individual. There's no manual about how you are supposed to live or about how humans should order themselves. And I think that we should keep that as a base understanding to just Cast away the shackles of things that have tried to control us as a society. You are your own person, and even this information, as big as it is, shouldn't change how you want to display yourself to the world. So that's why we always say, be good and be kind, seek knowledge and wisdom wherever you may find it. Defend yourself if you have to, but don't see everything as a problem that needs to be controlled and destroyed. So let's see what happens in the coming days. In a week's time, who knows? Things could be really, really different, but we'll see you next week, Sunday, StoryTime. Join us on the Prime Matter podcast. We'll put the video up there, and it'll be just super interesting. It's been my pleasure to host you this evening, ladies and gents. Catch you all next week. Much love.